the world of David Lynch, anything is possible. An eccentric janitor who can hear your thoughts, lighting a cigar for a half-fish, half-woman, birds flying into the windows until the light turns red, a motel with tumors in its rooms. But what if I told you these moments were only Lynchian in nature, not in name? Because the world of David Lynch and his incredible series, Twin Peaks, are so powerful and captivating, it stretches beyond his work and bleeds into so much of the media we love today. And the medium of games has been proven to be fertile ground on which to get as weird as can be. When it comes to getting weird, Twin Peaks is a cultural touchstone, and it's no surprise so many creators would be influenced by it. But what are the lines between inspiration and being too derivative? And how did these games grow and change the elements of their influence over time? Today we're looking at 3 distinct examples of games that tried to look deeper and imbue their works with Lynch's surreality. What do Life is Strange, Control, and Rusty Lake take from Twin Peaks? How and why? Twin Peaks is a supernatural mystery melodrama created by David Lynch and Mark Frost set in the fictional town of Twin Peaks, Washington, where homecoming queen teenager Laura Palmer is found
dead, wrapped in plastic.
Gaining critical notoriety and a large, passionate cult following, Lynch also went on to make the prequel Fire Walk with Me, which was a box office flop but later gained a cult following as well. And in 2017, the continuation of the series, The Return, was released, an 18-hour Benadryl trip of about the most art house and out television can get. The show is many things: surreal, charming, terrifying, operatic, eccentric, and complex. And the mystery of Laura Palmer and all the members of the town inspired an incredible amount of fans who were creatives to incorporate elements of what they loved about Twin Peaks and the greater Lynchian oeuvre into the art they made. Some more on the nose than others. I've seen quite a lot of tongue-in-cheek references to the Black Lodge, particularly in cartoons, as well as other small gags in things like the Eric Andre show. Let's start simple. What is Lynchian really? The term Lynchian refers to that of the style and overall filmic philosophy David Lynch has curated throughout his career. The Oxford Dictionary describes the term as noted for juxtaposing surreal or sinister elements with mundane, everyday environments, and for using compelling visual images to emphasize a dreamlike quality of mystery or menace. One of my favorite themes that connect these works is that of fate. Whether literally in terms of gameplay or more abstract, fate propels many of the events in all of them. In Life is Strange, fate is a core game mechanic, using your time travel abilities to either work with it or against it. Before Max uses her power for the first time to save Chloe, she sees a blue butterfly in the bathroom.
When a door closes, a window opens. Or something like that.
The symbol of the butterfly is a nod to the butterfly effect. And again, the butterfly effect is a literal game mechanic as well, as each time an action will have consequences, we see those words and a butterfly in the corner of the screen. But the butterfly effect is woven narratively into Life is Strange as well, best captured in saving Chloe's father William from dying, as she says that's what was the butterfly effect that started her mental decline. But of course, saving William causes Chloe to be in a car crash herself, which completely paralyzes her. It also causes Max to become part of the Vortex Club, a somehow even more unexpected factor of the butterfly effect in play here. But fate isn't only tethered to the butterfly effect throughout Life is Strange. We see the natural world deteriorating when fate doesn't go according to plan in the whales, the moons, the snow, and inevitably the storm. And during the storm, Chloe finally accepts her fate, that every time she died this week was a sign that's what would undo this whole mess. But somehow, it was still fate that they had that week together.
For reality, all those moments between us were real, and they'll always be ours.
Fate even works in the player's favor, or not, in terms of environmental storytelling. In each playthrough, a player would find a different amalgamation of documents, photos, dialogue lines, etc. that could help them in the story, or just give them a new insight on a character or the game as a whole. I've certainly had many moments over the last 6 years playing this game that I came across something completely new. One of the places you hope fate is on your side in your first playthrough is in Kate's room in episode 2. If you snoop in the right places, remember the right people and Bible verses, you will be able to save Kate on the roof even if you didn't help her before. Similarly, the player acts as an agent of fate in Rusty Lake. If the player doesn't solve every problem necessary to continue, the events of the game can't go on. Watching the timeline play out is seeing how fate works. Everyone's fate is inevitable the second they're near Rusty Lake itself. Especially true of William Vanderboom, or really, his disembodied spirit of which you take the reins while playing Rusty Lake Roots. Everyone's fate is his fate, because your actions are the keys throughout time that bring him back to life as Laura. The menu screen family tree is a visualization of the ripples of fate, especially because it branches out, not only in birth order, but in the other facets of their lives that bring about William's return. Control has a complicated relationship with fate in the world of the FBC, but there aren't any literal implications of it in the same way as Life is Strange. Rather, fate is the thread that sews together the Federal Bureau of Control. Even the oldest house itself, no one can get in unless they're looking for it. They are fated to enter the doors. But Jessie is different because she propels her own fate with Polaris in order to find her brother. Although the fate of being director, and the powers that come with it, are unknowingly thrust upon her. But fate is murky in the oldest house, as is truth and humanity. So, like a good Lynchian-inspired piece of media, Control asks questions of the viewer regarding fate rather than truly answering them. Take Jessie and Dylan's first experience with the supernatural, finding the slide projector at the ordinary dump. Was it fate that two gifted children, Jessie and Dylan, found the slide projector? Or was it fate that they were gifted powers from the slide projector? They were always destined to be prime candidates, and the mystical forces of the world understood that? Was it fate Jessie arrived just as the hiss took over, just as Trench died? As you can probably tell, Control gets weird. Really weird. Maybe even weirder than some of Twin Peaks. The team at Remedy Games endowed Control with a genre unto itself, the new weird. And when asked about Twin Peaks' influence, game director Mikhail Kasurian has this to say. Absolutely. I mean, in many ways, I think Control is an ultimate Remedy game because its core idea is to be able to encapsulate concepts and things we've dealt with in the past. Like if you take Alan Wake, you can see the Stephen King and Twin Peaks influence, this idyllic town and so on. Here, especially when you look at Twin Peaks Season 3, which is part of our overall inspiration for the new weird, you know. We have influences like Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey and the classic novel Roadside Picnic or Tarkovsky's Stalker. They are dealing with things beyond human comprehension, the surreal, utterly alien, but also at the same time captivating, and you kind of yearn to find out more. It's obvious the love the team behind Control had for the return and its full acceptance of the surreal. To me, best exemplified in the FBC staff frozen in midair no matter where you are in the oldest house. Fighting, casually walking, sad, scared, or happy, their chanting and suspended corpses are always watching. This and many other things like Ahti's ability to read your thoughts, the post-it room, pose more questions than answers, and overall contribute more to the tone and feel of the game than anything else. Most of the return is the same. While a variety of coherent narratives can be read into what we're given, nothing can fully explain what we see, but that doesn't mean we don't feel it. Early into the return, we encounter a glass box that allows an entity to violently murder a couple after their intimacy somehow calls her forth. This scene feels like a darker twist on many of the different quests and letters and audio logs you find in the oldest house. Lynch and Remedy's insistence in upholding the weird keeps the viewer even more on the edge of their seat because they put you in such a foreign situation where anything could happen. With the assumptions of what the work already is, you know it'll be batshit. Both works share a variety of technical similarities that aid in entrancing the viewer through this insanity and heightening the emotions. Control utilizes overlay a lot, as well as these trippy, electric, jump-cutty montages that remind me of scenes like Annie being led into the Black Lodge, actually anyone going into the Black Lodge, Dougie seeing the one-armed man everywhere, the whole nuclear bomb and woodsman thing, and a whole lot of other stuff. As the return goes on, more and more locations don the signature red curtains, as if the other world is bleeding out into the here and now. The same is true within the oldest house. Whether it's building shifts, the hiss blocking off certain areas, the cave bleed, again with the overlays. It's always two places at once, or really neither, in between.
The Ocean View Motel and Casino is a familiar friend to me. I stayed in countless motels like it while investigating AWEs across the country, back in my field agent days. Those roadside motels all bleed together like a dream. Same and not the same. anywhere and nowhere.
Nowhere is this more true than the worlds inside worlds, literally and metaphorically. Impossible space is normal, as are spaces inside the soul and consciousness, outside the world itself, or between worlds. Think the Black and White Lodge, wherever Philip Jeffries is, the Carrie Page universe. The Black Rock Quarry, the place we see in Ahti's vision, the Twisted Passage, and any place before you cleanse it. The places we see Cooper, Nido, and the firemen inhabiting immediately reminded me of the holy architecture of the oldest house, this concrete uniformity stretching out into the mystically natural. Speaking of the otherworldly places Cooper has been inhabiting for the last 25 years, there are striking thematic similarities between the Return and Control around mirror selves, tulpas, and animas. There's a popular theory, partly supported by the game, that Jesse and Dylan might have initially been the same person, split off from each other either as the Jungian concept of the anima animus or of the shadow. In the highly disturbing scene where Jesse is finally able to talk to Dylan, he recounts a series of dreams, including noting how Jesse and Dylan are both gender-neutral names and having a dream about being a Jesse Dylan Faden.
But in the dream, I was alone. It was just me. I was the only child. A girl. My name was Jesse Dylan Faden.
Dylan on his own, though, is another case of possession, a darker self coming over the original one due to supernatural trauma. Trench is the same at the end, both overtaken by the hiss. We also see the literal mirror self of Jesse, Edge, in a side quest where we go through a mirror portal. And from the beginning of the game, we are connected to the entity Polaris. She even ends up possessing and integrating with Jesse at the end, similar to the scene at the end of The Return where Cooper seems to integrate with Mr. C during sex with Diane. In The Return, the concept of tulpas are regularly discussed, and a number of characters we are with throughout end up being them, as well as the many identities we see Cooper, Diane, Leland, and Laura take on. This understanding of the self as a malleable concept, vulnerable to a variety of otherworldly forces, is a major theme throughout The Return, both as an expansion of the lore and on a more symbolic note around the shattering of the self due to trauma. And for Jesse and Cooper specifically, we see their souls completely overtaken by the pursuit of truth and the prices of it. Jesse's experience and her potential as an audience surrogate mirrors Cooper's as well. They're mysterious but relatable, quirky strangers traveling around the country in search of truth, real truth, weighing spirituality and dreams just as much as logic and theory. They also share an openness to all types of people, and thus an openness from all types of people. They'd feel at home chatting up strangers in nameless towns and motels one moment, and feel just at home the next, traversing through spaces like the Black Lodge and the Ashtray Maze. Because of their eccentricities, their openness, and their adaptability, Cooper and Jesse immediately function as agents of change in their respective narratives. They have the power to see and do what no one else does because they choose to look it in the face. But I think what ultimately allows them to cause such disruption with these traits is their otherness in a tight-knit space. Dale is an FBI agent coming into a small town that doesn't take kindly to strangers, especially when they're law enforcement. But he's able to win over many of his peers at the sheriff's office because of his subversions of what it means to be an other, an outsider, in a place like Twin Peaks. Albert is a good example of what they probably expected. And Jesse is in a similar boat, both as an outsider and as a subversion of the expectations the FPC staff has come to have about what the director could and should be. And because of their dislocation from the situation first and foremost, they become a fresh, level-headed perspective for both the other characters and the viewer, as we are even more of an other and even more dislocated than Jesse or Cooper could ever be. Max, too, is an other, but she's given a unique case because of her previous relation to Arcadia Bay, which not only gives us insight into the inner workings of the town, but frames the setting in an air of nostalgia, tying into the coming-age narrative at play in Life is Strange. It's interesting to note how Jesse comes from small-town USA and goes to the oldest house in New York City, but Cooper comes from the city to small-town Twin Peaks. I think the juxtaposing paths make the most sense for the trajectories of their characters, though. Dale is a suit breaking free into the fresh air, and Jesse is a nomad finally coming home. If we zoom out, we can see this juxtaposition of Americana versus Industry attempting to understand the impact of class and control in Twin Peaks. So much of Lynch's catalog focuses on the dichotomy of Industry versus Americana, city versus small-town life, but more importantly, the paradox that despite the fact that the people who work the hardest and live honest, simple lives make next to nothing and are profited on by a bunch of guys that do jack shit in an office somewhere. Whereas in Control, we're supposed to be those guys in the office. In most of Lynch's work, we watch from the perspective of the working class and are empathizing with them. Think of people like Ed, Norma, Donna's parents, Pete. Good, hardworking people with love in their hearts and tired hands. They are the true heroes of Twin Peaks, only really getting into trouble to get others out of it. And people like Ben and Catherine are probably more a threat to the town than any evil supernatural forces lurking in the forest. Even though we're allied with the suits in Control, the perpetuation of hierarchy and tradition is again probably a greater enemy than the Hiss. The people we empathize with most as Jesse are the people on the lower rungs of the FPC, and it's easier to see from their perspective than a harsher militaristic voice like Marshall's or the confused ramblings of Mr. Old Boys Club Trench. Jessie has also been on this other side so much more than the role she's supposed to now fill.
They say I'm the director, but what does that mean? I have no experience in leadership roles. I have no on-the-job training.
She was a janitor. She's been homeless. What does it say about Jessie's parents that she and her brother were always hanging out in a dump? So Jessie understands firsthand the importance of the working class backbone in America, despite its image in contemporary culture, which I may remind you is curated by the suits. And David Lynch knows this from real-life experience too, growing up in Pennsylvania around burnt-out factories and soup kitchens. The landscape in Eraserhead is purely an industrial dystopia, not unlike what he went through. These works partly form this contrast through environmental storytelling, although it's much more obvious in Control. In Twin Peaks, there is no shift in color, only material, and the associations of what luxury would look like in a remote place like Twin Peaks. Places like the Great Northern Hotel, specifically the Horne's quarters, and the Mill. Again, living quarters juxtaposed with the working space, the literal difference in height as Catherine watches from above. Here, the upper class are the exception. But in Control, the difference is always stark and immediate. The game director says, a key part of our thinking is that we're excited by contrast. The mundane meets the strange. We have this very bureaucratic organization in the game, doing research, everyday work, using science to understand the supernatural. It's a mundane environment that lies with the strange. So much of Control's environments function in extremities, and split-second transitions between them highlight what came before. Venturing to the motel, to the janitor's quarters, to the various break rooms are all reminders of the humanity that is otherwise vacant in the oldest house. Where the hallways of the research or containment sector are industrially uniform, but still impossible and otherworldly, there has to be a touch of humanity in awkwardly placed janitor job postings, or travel agency posters and used coffee mugs. One of the best elements of Twin Peaks' genre bending is its surreal brand of comedy, one that constantly sets the tone and can either lighten things up or be subverted into something much worse. In this environment with tons of quirky characters with different relationships to each other, public and private, there are many opportunities for each person's brand of weird to play off the other. And seeing people in such normal situations saying such insane things is funny. Each of these three games has their own unique sense of humor that takes different parts from Twin Peaks. Control goes in heavy with the quirky characters too, from overly excited nerd Emily Pope to snooty British scientist Underhill and of course Ahti, but my favorite example of this is Langston, this shifty, awkward, but overall well-meaning head of security and containment. His job is one that's probably the most important in the FBC, and because of the severity of these anomalies, the entire world. But all we hear from him are anxieties about his cat getting food at home.
Just don't take too long clearing out the hiss. My cat gets separation anxiety.
And contrived freestyles hidden away in the investigation sector.
Fight. Strange like a rubber duck that follows you around and makes you drop your coffee every time that it quacks.
I may as well eat cardboard.
He's really tackling important issues, huh?
These two widely opposing characteristics are so surreal inhabiting this one character you can't help but laugh. Like, you wouldn't even expect this guy to be a security manager at a mall, let alone the oldest house. Of course, there are many quirky characters in the Rusty Lake games too, but what is funniest throughout them is the sheer fucking insanity of the shit that you have to do to keep this game going. I'm sorry, you're asking me to match up the numbers of cavities on this woman's teeth so I can get a key out of her mouth? Or you're asking me to click this dog until he pees so I can feed it to a guy imprisoned in a well so he has enough strength to kill his captor, who's also his uncle? There's something about the agency, but simultaneously lack thereof, you have as the player to aid these characters in their actions that pushes the boundaries of completely believable and completely unbelievable at the same time. All of these works thrive in finding those sublime moments from in between these extreme dichotomies. The pacing also works to the advantage of the humor of Rusty Lake. Most levels start out fairly mundane, cleaning up the kitchen, getting someone a drink, etc., and quite instantly drop into the depths of the unknown. Miss Pigeon in Hotel is a good example of this. You're just here to give this lady some corn in the bath, but suddenly open up this locked thing in her room and you're helping a baby chick captured by the pigeon electrocute her. This domino effect of insanity has to make you laugh, because if you weren't, you'd be crying. On the other hand, one of Twin Peaks' major selling points is its melodrama and scandal. We can't help but watch the collective car crash that is this town, as the seedy, intricate web of character relationships come to light. Out of the 3 games, I think Rusty Lake actually gets this the best. Rusty Lake understands the complex dynamics that come from generations of trauma and how they layer upon each other. And the ways these traumas present themselves are so outlandish, you can't help but think of the melodrama and soaps Twin Peaks is parodying throughout. But somehow the trials and tribulations of the Vanderboom family or the Elianders take these surreal concepts and turn them into incredibly meaningful moments. Once you're swept up in the logic of the world they've created, everything is rational, endearing, real. And that's true of Twin Peaks too. Both works construct a duality they can freely move between, thanks to the already surreal and dreamlike subject matter. We understand there will be irregular shifts in tone, and thus adjust accordingly. Sometimes things are so crazy we can't help but laugh, but in moments like when Rose and Frank are dancing, the ending of Paradise, the aftermath of Dale's childhood birthday party, or anytime things get really serious in Twin Peaks, we care about these characters enough to really feel these moments. And to me these days, finding sincere moments in worlds of surreality feel closest in tone to really experiencing those moments. In a in-memory, everything happens to music kind of way. Similarly, the indie glaze slathered over the scenic Pacific Northwest setting of Life is Strange sets the stage for a uniquely teenaged brand of melodrama, not so much unlike that of scenes in Twin Peaks when James and Donna are ruminating on their lost friend. Melodrama itself is complicated in Twin Peaks, in terms of Lynch's influences this time. So much of the dialogue, acting, and I'd also go as far as to say the soundtrack, is fueled by parody of soap operas. There's even the more metatextual element of Invitation to Love, the fictional soap opera that pokes fun at the use of melodrama all throughout the show. Now at this point, I should probably correct myself. I'm talking about Rusty Lake like it's one game, but rather it's a game studio, a series of games, and a fictional lake that sucks out your memories for forest magic. On their website, their About page reads, Rusty Lake is an indie game studio based in Amsterdam, founded by Robin Rass and Martin Luis. Since spring 2015, we have developed 13 surrealistic adventure games that take place in the Rusty Lake universe. Inspired by the humor and uneasiness of David Lynch's TV series, Twin Peaks, we decided to create our own imaginative universe called Rusty Lake. Notice anything there? Like when they straight up name drop Twin Peaks in their fucking About page? Herein lies my problem with the Rusty Lake games fundamentally. Their unending devotion to associate and appropriate material from the show. They have characters named Laura, Dale, Bob, and Laura and Dale are obviously physically inspired by their Lynchian counterparts. They use elements like backwards talking.
Is this Rusty Lake?
Shape or
Fate.
I am sorry. Your flesh is already shaken. Will be lost as is never said. It's not even us.
The owls are not what they seem, and even the soundtracks of various games get pretty close to Badalamenti sometimes. It's just too heavy-handed and superficial for people who clearly understand the show and understand how to make good games. The Rusty Lake series already has a fantastically unique mise-en-scène, interesting lore, and a world that is so quintessentially itself that trying to adapt this show into their series is a serious detriment. It's upsetting to me that for some reason, their instantly recognizable aesthetic wasn't enough. But it's the least recognizable when Walmart brand Twin Peaks is slapped on top of it. Especially because they visually look so different from anything Lynch has made, and rather remind me more of Wes Anderson, or even things like Poirot, Clue, Sherlock, old-timey mysteries. It's okay to be inspired by something and turn it into something your own. In fact, it's better that way. The good thing about Rusty Lake is how it's improved so much with this over the years. Rusty Lake Roots, my favorite in their series, is just so itself. But I can also see the most Lynchian material in it, because it truly feels transformed. Similarly, Remedy Games' Alan Wake series takes on the most superficial elements of Twin Peaks, but Control goes deeper by finding their weird and sticking to it. In Life is Strange's early development, Rachel Amber was originally going to be called Jessie Palmer, much more obvious than the on-the-nose references like this graffiti on the mirror, Chloe's favorite band, and the license plates referencing the game's influences in various parking lots. I'm glad they changed Rachel's name, because her characterization speaks enough to her parallels with Laura Palmer. They are the it girls, fitting in with everyone and adhering to everyone's needs. Unlike people like Dale or Jesse, who elicit strong reactions from people because of their authenticity, Laura and Rachel are chameleons, able to change into whatever anyone wants at any given time. Friend, lover, straight-A student, model, volunteer worker, drug mule, prostitute, spirit animal, they are still chameleons, even in death. No matter what shady business either of these girls got into, it's clear their impact on the people around them was real and deep, and they would never deserve what happened to them. But the mysteries surrounding their murders kickstart the unearthing of many secrets, scandals, and exploits in their towns, as well as unmasking the truth of many of the town's inhabitants. What honestly does upset me about Life is Strange around Rachel's story is its unwillingness to give a name to the probable sexual violence she and the other girls faced at both the hands of Nate and Mark Jefferson. They only get dark about it for shock value, like the throwaway necrophilic line Jefferson spouts out as you're running away from him in the nightmare sequence.
Rachel not only gave great headshots, she gave great head. Especially after I dug her body up to be with her one final time. Why are you looking at me like that?
Only going so far as to use the word rape in this one unused clip of Max and Nathan.
Tell me stat, Caulfield.
Did you rape her?
You are fucking evil, Max. No way are you asking me this. I didn't touch her, and I wouldn't. You just crossed my red line, you little...
But mostly, the photography is a stand-in for rape. It feels hollow and insecure, and takes away from the message they're trying to make. Twin Peaks, on the other hand, although still a show geared towards a more adult audience, is upfront about the gender-specific violence Laura and many other women throughout the show face. While it's graphic in some pretty traumatizing ways, David Lynch is always empathetic to his female characters in violent sexual relationships, and allows for them to be agents of their story, and if not that, agents of their narrative. The ways men in Twin Peaks objectify her are condemned for a more holistic, humanistic look at all aspects of Laura. We see her shine and her vulnerabilities, her allure and the dissemination of it. And although she's dead throughout the series, her perspective is always there. How would this make Laura feel? Would she agree with what this person said? What would her testimony be? That's what we're fundamentally searching for in Twin Peaks, an answer to the mystery of Laura Palmer herself. And you can't go about creating a mystery like that without being empathetic and understanding of who Laura is as a person, not as a sexual object or a dead girl MacGuffin. David Lynch always does a great job being honest about the sexual violence women face because he is centering the women and their pain, and hopefully sometimes the redemption or recovery, and is looking at it from their view, thus making us empathize with them as well. To me, the mystery of Rachel is built around Chloe, her reactions and persistence, winning over her friendship by giving it all up to help her with this cause. In Life is Strange, Rachel isn't a person. She's an object, an idea, a pretty face and a bunch of tragic backstories, but none of them are hers. They just involve her. It's a shame her perspective is rarely centered in the story, and even someone like Kate for that matter. It's hard to explain, but you can feel the story is about them, not with them. And the insistence on metaphor rather than honesty around Jefferson's predatory nature is the last straw here. There's so much potential in this part of the story to give a voice to those who've been groomed and abused by people like Jefferson, and experience traumatic sexual harassment or violence at the hands of party culture too, like Kate. It doesn't do the same justice that it could, and frankly should, be doing. Speaking of grooming, it's obvious Jefferson has been grooming Max this whole time too. And if we're sticking with the photography as rape allegory, he abused Max in the darkroom as well. But the game never gives Max or the player enough time to process the gravity of that situation. But that's a whole other video for another time. Okay, back to the lighter stuff. Aside from Rachel's character, I don't think the rest is derivative. It takes some parts and builds on them and incorporates them into the overall independent story and mood. While Twin Peaks' setting and the sense of place is integral for all of these works, Life is Strange and Twin Peaks share the most similarities in environment and their thematic usage of it. Both take place in a similar, sleepy small town in the Pacific Northwest, with secrets around every corner, rusted signs and pickup trucks on the main street by the anachronistic diner. Characters like Samuel would fit perfectly into Twin Peaks, as would the homeless woman outside the diner who reminds me of the log lady. Even Max showing up to the diner in Rachel's clothes feels like a parallel to Maddie's resemblance to Laura, and the ways she, Donna, and James use that to their advantage. Outside the towns are beautiful, luscious landscapes that quell the stressors of the world, but harbor an even darker energy. Again, take for instance the natural elements of Life is Strange, and the ways they are manipulated by the ever-growing chaos caused by Max, but also the more unexplained things we encounter, like the spirit of the doe, giant squirrels in the dream sequence, and Samuel's attachment to them overall. There's a sense of magic and energy in all of the locations of Life is Strange, and I use magic as a neutral term here because sometimes it can be evil, like the sick feeling you get in your stomach once you realize Chloe has been chilling out on top of Rachel's dead body ever since she went missing. Even though many of the characters of Twin Peaks were teenagers and young adults, the show was made for an adult audience and, as we've talked about, touches on many adult themes. But also adult in the more boring sense. People are married, they have children and pay taxes, they've been pining after high school love for years, own businesses, etc. Life is Strange used the other genres it falls into to its advantage, and takes what was adult in Twin Peaks and builds it back into teenage. Teenage stakes throughout most of the lighter portions of the game, teenage lingo, teenage specialized locations, while keeping a similar tone of voice and sense of mystery. The coming-of-age side of Life is Strange is where it diverges from Twin Peaks the most. But Blackwell's sense of place, both literally and socially, are some of the most important elements of the game. Taking place at what's fundamentally a liberal arts school, it's no shocker that more than any of these works, Life is Strange proudly wears its heart on its sleeve when it comes to the media it loves. The creators insisted on name-dropping so much media, whether it be art, movies, literature, games.
Philip Lorca de Corsia, my man. I don't think I could take my camera to those places. Would Man Ray call them selfie portraits? That is a tasty plasma. Maybe I could sneak in and watch Final Fantasy Spirits Within. I don't care what anybody says, that's one of the best sci-fi films ever made.
I couldn't find them again, but I know there are references to Tetsuo the Iron Man, Doctor Who, Akira, and the Beat Poets somewhere in here too. Even Max's last name is a reference to Catcher in the Rye, as is the poster in her room and the hat in the principal's office. All this, as well as the metatextual tropey references to a variety of genres, the small town with secrets thriller, high school angst, Bildungsroman, indie. It's a great 21st century understanding of a very specific type of adolescence, the elitist and creative academia type, one I certainly know well, and one that is rife with constant references and jargon, the more indie underground the better, like currency or badges of honor, competition of knowing the most or best and knowing it well.
Who photographed the famous falling soldier?
Robert Capa, of course. I love his work, despite the controversy about that photo.
My. This quiet child knows things.
That's why I'm here.
You're a kindred spirit, Max. Would you care for a perusal of my portfolio? It's not a privilege I grant to many.
I'd be honored, sir.
Always storing log lines and mission statements at the front of your mind for a moment's notice, as well as the more positive way you become the media you enjoy. You emulate it, identify with it, and identify others through it. Life is Strange really captures that environment, externally and internally. Still, the Life is Strange devs have never actually said anything about Twin Peaks, which I find possibly telling of the fact they didn't get the rights to use something more on the nose, whether it was Jesse Palmer or the name itself or whatever. But I actually think the game is better for it. While it's important for Max and the Blackwell kids to mention artists, movies, and bands, its reliance on setting Twin Peaks in the subtext, the back of your mind, alludes to the uneasy feeling of hominess in the town as dark things are brewing in the warmest looking of places. Still, in Life is Strange, many of the locations where bad things happen are literally hidden away from view, whereas Twin Peaks' monsters are lying in plain sight, in places known for comfort, rest, and safety. Think the Palmer's carpeted living room, Laura's picturesque teenage bedroom, the Great Northern Hotel. This is the postmodern standard these days. You can draw on so much that influence becomes tone. A new visual language, new opportunities for stories and image to become myth, ingrained in our cultural collective unconscious. We've seen it all, so accept it and do it again your way. That's what original is now. Can we understand influence as a conduit of tone? Is alluding to a tone creating one? I'm inclined to believe these works successfully did, and on a broader note that because of the cyclical nature of influence, it always has been. Remedy, Rusty Lake, and Dontnod couldn't have made their games without Twin Peaks, but Lynch and Mark Frost couldn't have made Twin Peaks without soap operas or even the real-life murder of Hazel Drew. Soaps couldn't have been made without dramatic weekly radio shows, and those wouldn't have been made without serialized dramas in magazines and newspapers. Every element of every piece of media has a long lineage of inspiration, and being able to accept that and utilize it is what makes things like Control, Rusty Lake, and Life is Strange so good. Why is the medium of games so rife with Lynchian potential? There obviously seems to be a connection between weirdness and agency in game worlds, that by having to assume a role in the story, the player buys into the surreality more easily. Games are having a renaissance in terms of narrative storytelling in general. People want games that push the boundaries. So a lot of weird-ass shit is actually making a ton of money right now. Does this mean the medium of game makes weirdness more accessible? Like a good Lynch fan, I'm ending this with more questions than answers, but I'll ask anyone who watched this far one last thing. Would David Lynch make a good video game? Would you play a Twin Peaks or a Return game? And what would that look like to you? Let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. This is my first real video essay, and I've been meaning to do this for years. I have a couple more I'm already working on, so if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and stick around to see more in the future.